Hey, it's Jason Rogers here, and in this video, let's talk about financing your first deal. Because look, this is a different challenge than financing subsequent deals. I'm noticing this right now. As I go out and look to make subsequent acquisitions, bankers really are chasing me. They're interested in myself, in our endeavors, in really the acquisitions we're looking to put together. But when I was starting for that first deal, it's a very different game. Usually you're the one, I should say, chasing bankers, unless if you do a lot of front-loading work. And getting that financing for the first deal, let's just be blunt about it, it is more difficult than subsequent deals because, again, you don't really have a track record yet to lay that foundation upon. That said, there are ways to get your deals funded, especially your first deal. I am testament to that. Let's talk about it. So first things first, I would really recommend for you that you do all the homework ahead of time to be in a position where you're the kind of person somebody should give money to. And I really can't hit that point enough. You need to be the kind of person that a neutral party would think, that's an individual who deserves to get financing for their deal. This individual's buttoned up, they know their stuff, they have a strong operational team, they picked a great business acquisition target. This is somebody that deserves to get financing for this deal. You really need to get that handled. You need to be that person, you need to find that deal, you need to have that almost sixth sense that you portray. And that really, in my opinion, comes from doing your homework, making a lot of calls, having a great team, really doing all of the front-loaded work to put yourself in that advantageous position where you sound like a professional and you look like a professional and you carry yourself like a professional. That being said, let's get a little bit more tactical now. I would say to you, ultimately, the two best places to look for financing for your first deal would be one, the SBA or equivalent government financing programs in your country, and then two, seller finance. And I actually want to start with number two because I believe seller finance is probably the best place to look for financing, though you don't want to look for seller financing in a very straight path. And I'll explain. Look, here's the thing with seller finance. If you ring, call up business owners and immediately start begging for seller finance, you're going to come off as needy and desperate, and you're essentially not going to get anywhere. I figured this out from firsthand experience. That's not to say that if you asked 50,000 business owners for seller finance, if you wouldn't find 5 owners that would give you the seller finance. The law of large numbers holds true for even very small likelihoods of occurrence. But my point is generally that the more strategic way to increase your odds of getting seller finance are not to immediately in day one start asking for seller finance. That's been my experience. Maybe you have a different style, so that doesn't mean that you can't get it in other ways. But generally speaking, I've found that business owners would rather deal with somebody that they feel could buy their business the good old-fashioned way. A business owner wants to sell to you usually because you're a respectable human being, you have a great team, you have a big vision for their business, and because you can pay them the good old-fashioned way. But what you want to really look to do with seller finance is bring it up over time, and oftentimes the seller will actually bring up seller finance to you. And this is the best. This really is the best. And the reason a seller will bring up seller finance to you once you start negotiating and engaging in extended conversation is because there's a lot of tax benefits here in the United States for carrying out seller finance. See, what happens if I buy your business for $1 million and you receive $1 million at the closing table, you're only going to keep about maybe $650,000 of those dollars, more or less, depending on the state you're in, because of capital gains, the tax on capital gains. And of course, that depends on how much you bought the business for or if you started the business from scratch. And there's other variables that would really influence exactly how much money you would keep of the million if you were being bought out for $1 million for your business. But generally, you pay a ton in taxes for all cash transactions, whether that's bank finance or just cash out of your bank account into the seller's bank account. So that's a huge way in which you can get a seller to be more open to seller finance. Another way in which you can ultimately get a seller to start thinking more about seller finance is the fact that they're actually going to be able to make interest income. They're going to be able to make interest income, right? They're going to be loaning you money at 6% per year or 5% per year or 3% per year or 8% per year, whatever, right? But there's an interest rate associated with the financing, and that's just straight up income. So now what's really happened with seller finance is this seller's gone from having to pay 25 or 30 or 35 or 45 or 50% of the money they received in capital gains to instead receiving interest income on top of the principal of the loan they made to you. And so seller finance in many regards can be a great play for the seller. And this is why I don't believe you need to immediately start begging the seller to finance your deal. This is why I'd much rather just investigate the deal, get to know the business owner, really get to know the local marketplace, start doing your due diligence, start carrying out conversations, be speaking with lenders about the deal that you're looking to potentially finance. And all throughout that process, at some point, either you can bring up seller finance, or even better still, when the seller brings it up to you. And when that happens, oftentimes it's very easy naturally to get that seller finance, because usually what happens is the seller talks to his or her accountant, and the accountant says, well, Bob, you're about to pay a ton in taxes when this transaction goes through. And naturally the seller says, what can I do to get around taxes? And then the accountant says, well, you could engage in seller finance. The seller talks about it with a significant other for a couple of days, and then a couple of days later he picks up the phone and tells you, hey, I might, under the right circumstances, be willing to carry some paper. Voila, now you're talking about seller finance. But now let's go back to the other way in which I really think it's most likely for you to get your first deal financed, and that is the SBA, the Small Business Loan Program. And usually it's going to be an SBA 7A program. The SBA 7A is a 10-year amortizing note, which means you're going to pay it off. It's fully amortizing over 10 years, which means you're going to be paying all the principal and the interest over a 10-year term. The interest rates for the SBA aren't great. They're not terrible. Right now, the interest rates are probably going to be about 6.5%. That's as of June of 2020. But in any event, the SBA is essentially government-backed financing. And so what this means really is you can get financing on a deal that a normal lender would not give, because the government is going to basically act as insurance on behalf of the lender, so that if the deal goes bunk and you can't repay your loan, the lender's not going to eat it. Rather, the government's going to come in and protect the bank and fill up their coffers, and then the government's going to eat it. But the government, in a very loosely speaking way of saying it, can print more money, so the government can do these kinds of things. And that's why the SBA is great. The SBA is great because really you can get the government to insure your deal, or at least insure between 75 to 90% of the deal. And so what that means is you can then negotiate 5 or 10% of the capital stack to be as seller second, basically a seller note. Some of that, if you hold off the repayment for the length of the first position SBA note, counts as seller's equity. You then maybe find 5 or 10% of the capital stack in cash, either your own cash or an investor's cash, whether it's a friend, a family member, an acquaintance, somebody you message on LinkedIn, a board member that you have, or a mentor that you have, whomever. You find this cash from somewhere, and then you really can get a deal done with none of your own money out of pocket, or maybe a very small amount of money out of your own pocket, and you get the deal done. So those are really the two main ways I think you can get your deals financed, especially your first deal. It's going to take persistence. I mean, that is the name of the game. You're going to have to make a lot of calls, pick up the phone many times. You're going to experience some rejection. You got to keep fighting. You got to keep pushing. Business is really a game of attrition. A lot of people will give up. A lot of people will bow out. It's the strong ones, the ones that just stay persistent, that get the results at the end of the game. And that's what I've seen. That's what people I work with are seeing. And that's what you'll see as well.
Hey, it's Jason Rogers. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to subscribe, thumbs up the video, and for more, go to jasonpaulrogers.com.
Hey, one last thing we need to talk about in this video is the power of reaching out to SBA lenders months in advance, months before you need the money. This is paramount. The sooner you can start introducing yourself to an SBA lender, the better. Period. With one big caveat, one major caveat, which is you need to speak well. You need to be educated about finance. In my YouTube channel, I don't mean to plug myself, but it just really is a good place to learn about finance. I understand finance. I learn finance. I'm talking about acquisition financing. I'm not talking about credit cards here. Okay, we're not talking about that. We're talking about acquisition financing. You need to know terms like debt service coverage ratio. You need to understand free cash flow. You need to be able to read a balance sheet, be able to look at the assets and look at the liabilities and be able to tell the difference between the two. Literally, if you don't know how to do that, just pick up a dummy's accounting book. Google around, right? But ultimately, this is what's mattering in getting the financing. It's picking up the phone well in advance, picking up the phone well before you need the money, and introducing yourself to lenders, getting to know them, talking about your investment thesis, begin talking about about the sector that you're making acquisitions in or the set of sectors that are similar. Start talking about your operational team. Start talking about the types of companies you're looking for. These are things you want to be discussing with lenders well in advance. A little bit of, hey, how are you doing? It's so hot out today, gee whiz. Right? You want to start building that rapport. And in doing so, once you finally have a hot deal, if you've really pre-sold yourself correctly in the ways we've touched on here in this video, they're going to be hungry for your deal. You have to remember, the SBA, because it's a government-backed program, those lenders have a different set of criteria from which they're lending on, and they really can think a bit more entrepreneurial than anybody else. They can be more entrepreneurial. They can think more like a business owner. They can think more like a aggressive capitalist because they have the backing of the government. But you need to make them comfortable to really allow them to think in that way. You need to make them comfortable with bringing them great deals only. Deals that definitely have at least 150% free cash flow after debt service. Preferably a 200% DSCR or better. And you want to be looking for revenues and EBITDA, the earnings, that's consistent year after year. That's really important. Ultimately, the more you speak the language of finance, the more you actually speak from a really conservative place, the more you actually show a lot of detachment from doing a deal fast. Bankers love that. They love it when you have the ability to say no. I told bankers of all the deals I passed. You know what it did? It made them more interested in working with me. That's just the truth. From my perspective, and I see it pretty clearly right now because I have 4 different bankers that are in constant communication with me about the deal we're looking to get financed right now. To the point where I'm literally not even focused on financing for more than about 5 to maybe 10% of my day. It's already basically in the bag. And that's what happens as well when you get a lot of bankers competing with one another. It makes it exponentially easier for you to get better terms, to guarantee less, if at all, to have more working capital. If there's flexibility on amortization, then to be able to play with that a little bit more. This is the power of doing your homework on the front end, really being somebody who speaks the language of finance, who has put together the right framework for success, that focuses a lot on operations, that focuses a lot on financing and the financials. You build a great team ahead of time. You introduce yourself ahead of time. That's really how it's done. It works. I'm living it. It's great. It's honestly incredible. I was a guy that never focused on the nuts and bolts of finance until just 2 years ago. And to realize how available acquisition financing is, especially when it's either backed by the government or provided by the seller of the business. And really, at the end of the day, you have these financing options. Well, firstly, you have the SBA option by not going into real estate. I went into real estate when I started, and well, that takes the SBA route, gone. So I recommend service businesses, really. But at the end of the day, maybe you already have picked real estate, in which case seller finance is a great way to go, or you're just going to need more capital. But for those of you who are making service business acquisitions, or, it's kind of a gutsy time to do it, but you're buying restaurants, for example, if you're buying these types of true businesses in the United States of America, then yeah, use the SBA. And if you're an international, you can actually get an international's visa and an SBA loan in the same package. I know for some countries it's easier than others. I know for some people, based on candidly what you've been up to over the last 20 years, those things are relevant. Maybe with everything that's happening in the world right now, everything that's going on, it will actually be easier for people to enter on an equal basis based on all of the equality movements that are happening right now. I don't know. But my point is I would really look to the SBA, if at all possible, as an option. Doesn't mean it has to be your option. Ultimately, what you really want to do is get all these SBA lenders competing against each other for the SBA hunk, and then seller finance. And you are juggling to find the best terms. That's in a nutshell how to get your first deal done financed in a way that really sets you up well, or at least as well as possible. You probably won't get the all-time best financing on your very first deal, unless if you have a great guarantor that's going to co-sign. But as you'll find, people don't like co-signing on loans. Some people will. You ask enough people, somebody will. But people generally just don't want to risk it all for your deal. It's pretty self-evident. Why would I take a huge risk for something that's not going to benefit me? I'm not. I know I won't. Don't ask me to guarantee your deal, right? I won't. But that's why the SBA is great. And that's why seller finance is great. Because in both of those options, you guarantee it alone, or you don't guarantee it at all. But it all lies on you. So then that's your game to play about whether or not you are up for guaranteeing, whether you're going to sign on the dotted line. But at least it's a conversation you can have with yourself in the mirror. You don't need anybody else. And as an entrepreneur, that's all I want. Everyone gets to make their risk-free reward tolerance decisions. But all I ask for as an entrepreneur is put it on my shoulders. And these two financing options give you the ability to do that. That's why they're the best for doing a first deal.